This gospel passage is taken from Mark chapter 9. John said to Jesus, "Teacher, we saw someone casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." But Jesus said, "Do not stop him, for no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able soon afterward to speak evil of me. Whoever is not against us is for us. For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward. If any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and to go to hell, to the unquenchable fire. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than to have 2 eyes and to be thrown into hell, where their worm never dies and the fire is never quenched." The American poet Mary Oliver writes, "There are some things you can't reach, but you can reach out to them, and all day long." And what we reach out for is this sense of authentic discipleship that Jesus speaks of and to which he invites us today. Of course, John and the disciples are kind of bent out of shape, because these people aren't following us. Well, they're not supposed to follow them. They're supposed to follow Jesus. And the nature and cast and character of how Jesus is wanting us to follow him is to be about the same kind of inclusion to which he dedicated his life. When we're inclusive, we take seriously what Jesus took seriously. He wants us to imagine with him a circle of compassion and then imagine that nobody is outside that circle. So you can't really live with a sentence that says, he's not one of us. That doesn't really compute. And so we also share the same keen attention to the vulnerable because they're the ones who everybody says they aren't a part of who we are. They're not one of us. And so we widen the circle. And that's how we measure the authenticity of our discipleship. So for 27 years, I've worked with gang members, and I run a very large gang intervention program and have for a quarter of a century. Thousands and thousands of gang members from LA County have come and worked in all our businesses at Homeboy Industries, a bakery, a restaurant, lots of things. We remove tattoos and such. And the nature of the place, since the very beginning in 1992, actually 1988, was when we'd have enemies work side by side with each other. Of course, the very definition of a gang is we are the guys who hate those guys. They aren't one of us. And so at Homeboy, with gang members, we want to seek to obliterate once and for all the illusion that we're separate, that there's an us and that there's a them. But it's dicey at first. Gang members have a hard time working with their enemies, for sure. So I was invited last summer to go to Knoxville, Tennessee to give a talk, and I brought 2 homies with me, but I went on my way not to just find homies who have never flown before, but to get enemies, rivals. So I picked Jimmy, who was just this tall drink of water, little, very skinny guy, a kind of a slow poke. He kind of takes them 3 times around the bend to kind of get the joke. He's kind of a slow guy. And his arch enemy rival, Neil, who's a little tiny guy, but quick and fast. And they just don't like each other. They're from enemy rival gangs. So they're kind of silent on the way to Knoxville, Tennessee. But once we get there, they get caught up in the experience and the thrill of being in a different place. And they help me give a talk, and we see all the sights of Knoxville, Tennessee. I think there are like 2 of them. And And then they, shared a room together in this fancy hotel, or at least they thought it was pretty fancy. And then we were flying home, and something had sort of broken through, really. And Jimmy was at the window, staring out the window. He'd never not stare out of it. And then there was Neil and then me in the aisle. And we're getting close to LA, and it's a beautiful day, and we're starting to land. We're about 10 minutes out, and I don't know why I said this, but I looked over through the window. I said, Jimmy, I can see your house from here. Well, obviously, I didn't even know where he lived, and he's looking, all like this. And Neil says, hey, I can see your lady standing in front of your house, And I look more carefully, and I said, wait a minute. Who's that guy that she's hugging and kissing standing in front of your house? And Neil says, wait, I can read lips. And he looks out the window, and he says, she's saying, hurry, hurry, Jimmy's plane is about to land. And Jimmy turns to Neil, and he says, you can read lips, he says. And we died laughing, at least Neil and I did, and suddenly something was broken through. A circle had been widened. And somebody who felt like he was not a part, that he wasn't one of us, suddenly is welcomed in. The great novel Passage to India by E.M. Forster begins with these two words, only connect. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to connect to each other, especially to bridge any distance and gulf there is that separates us. I met a homie named Danny who was 19 years old and lived in a car at the time. A gang member, he was selling PCP to stay alive. Both parents were heroin addicts and missing in action. Nobody knew where they were. And I met him. And I said, hey, if I found you a job, is there something you want to do? And he said, I'd love to be an auto mechanic. But he didn't know very much about cars. So I went to my mechanic, who was a legendary auto mechanic in East LA, the best in the East, a guy named Dennis, who was just this tall, lanky Japanese-American fellow. He was not a man of few words. He was a man of no damn words at all. He just didn't speak to you. All he did was chain smoke. He would just light one cigarette after another. And you'd bring your keys to him, and you'd say, Dennis, I don't know, there's a noise in the engine. I don't know what it is. And you came back the next day, he handed you the keys, and now the car runs perfectly, and no words are exchanged in the course of this interaction. So I sit him down in his office. I say, Dennis, hire this kid, Danny. He's a nice kid. He's a gang member, but he's trying to change his life. This isn't just one job for one kid. It would actually transform the neighborhood in which he lives, and give peace a chance, Dennis. And Dennis just takes long drags on a cigarette, doesn't say a word to me, so I redouble my efforts, and I say, gosh, a Nobel Peace Prize will change the world as we know it. Maybe I overstated some of these things, and he just stared at me, and he listened, and finally I give up. I think, well, I did the best I could. And finally, Dennis takes one long drag on his cigarette, and smoke wafts in front of his face. And this is the only thing he said to me that day. He said, I will teach him everything I know. And so he did. And Danny became a mechanic. And periodically he'd check in with me and give me updates on the things he had learned. I did a lube job all by myself today. Today I fixed a carburetor. Once he came into my office and he handed me a photograph, and in the photograph is this little kid, Danny, with axle grease smeared on his face, and he's wearing a work shirt with Danny embroidered over here. Huge smile. No doubt in anybody's mind that this job has transformed this life. But standing next to him with his arm around him, with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, was Dennis, and equally certain that having hired this kid had transformed his life. Only connect, but especially connect to those folks who aren't one of us. And that's how you measure how authentic we are as followers. This morning, normally I would be saying 2 masses in a probation camp or a juvenile hall. I'm in 25 different facilities where on a rotating basis as a priest, I say Mass. And, usually my Saturdays look the same. I do 2 Masses in the camps or in the jails, and then I race home to Dolores Mission, where I was pastor for a number of years, and I've lived there for 27 years, so people always ask me to do stuff. So my Saturdays always look identical. So I'll have 1 o'clock baptism and 2 o'clock wedding and 3 o'clock quinceañera when a girl turns 15, 4 o'clock exorcism. Just checking to see if you're still listening to me. I've never done one of those. But so I came home this one day, and it was 12:30 in the afternoon, and I think, well, gosh, I have time before my 1 o'clock baptism to go to my office and kind of go through my mail. And it was just nice to have this sort of me time, as they call it. And I'm going through my mail, contento, feliz, when all of a sudden this woman barges into my office. And her name, I find out, is Lisa. She's about 30. She's kind of well known on the streets. She's kind of a street person, a gang member, tattooed, been to prison, a felon, heroin addict, prostitute, something of a famous gritona, as we say in Spanish. She's always screaming. You can always hear her scream at the guy who tosses her out of the bar next door, yelling at him. You can hear her scream into a payphone on First Street, yelling at family members or friends, just let me stay tonight, pleading with them. This is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. And she walks into my office, and I think now it's 7 minutes to 1, and there goes my me time. She plunks herself down in my office. She launches right in. She says, I need help. Dude, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. I went to Catholic schools all my life, she says. I graduated from elementary. I even graduated from Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. And then she gets quiet and still. And she says, in fact, first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated from high school. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head against the wall behind her, and her eyes became like 2 ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried and she cried, till finally she leveled her gaze at me, and she said with great deliberation, I am a disgrace. And suddenly her shame meets mine, because when I had seen her step into my office that afternoon, I had mistaken her for an interruption. After all, she's not one of us. Only connect. It's how we measure our authentic discipleship. Does the circle widen because of you? And those who are left out, are they brought in? It's an occupational hazard in my biz that if you hire one kid from one gang, you're going to get 8 phone calls the next day from kids from the same gang asking to be hired. And sure enough, one day I get a phone call from a kid I'd never met, and all he says on the phone is, hey, this is Chico from White Fence. Kick me down with a jale, he says, which roughly translates, do you think you could locate gainful employment for me? And I said, well, I don't even know you. Maybe we should meet. So I go to his house, and I meet this 17-year-old skinny, tattooed kid with big, huge, floppy ears. We sit on his front porch, he and I, and we talk. I meet his mother, Rosa, who's a very nice woman who seems happy that I've intervened somewhat in her kid's life. And we talk about a job. Is there some skill you'd like to pick up? I ask him. And he says, yeah, I'd like to learn computers, but I don't know nothing about them. So long story short, I find a place called the Chrysalis Center in downtown LA I knew the director at the time. It's a homeless resource center. And they had a huge bank of computers that somebody had donated. And so I said, hey, I got this kid. He's a gang member. He's 17 years old. I'd like him to work for you from Monday through Friday, 1 to 5. He goes to school in the morning at an alternative school. I'd like you to teach him everything you know about computers. I'll pay him myself every Friday somehow, and we'll call it a job. And she said, great, send him over. So I call up Chico and I say, your lucky day begins on Monday at 1 o'clock. You have 2 bosses. One of them you'll meet at 1 o'clock. The other boss you're talking to on the phone. So if I find out you're hanging, banging, or slanging, if you're kicking it with the homies, or you're selling drugs of any kind, or if you're gang banging, writing on the walls at the low end, or shooting at people at the high end, if you're hanging, banging, or slanging, I'm going to fire you. Are we clear? He says, I won't let you down. So Monday comes, and I look at the clock on the wall, and it's 1 o'clock, and I think, well, Chico's walking into his new job. And the clock goes like this, like it does in the movies, and it's 5 o'clock, and I go, Chico's walking out of his job. I go, oh, maybe I'll stick around here. Maybe he'll come by. Maybe he'll call. Maybe he'll tell me how it went. Nope. Same thing Tuesday, 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock. I wait. Still nothing. Tuesday turns into Wednesday. Wednesday turns into Thursday. And then another occupational hazard kicks in. You think the worst. You think maybe my directions were bad. Maybe he flaked out. Maybe his probation officer popped him. And finally, at 3 o'clock on Thursday, just when I begin to think the worst, out of my fax machine, which was right on my desk, comes chugging this faxed message, Chrysalis Center, letterhead. It's from our pal Chico at his new job. Big, huge block letters this fat. Dear G, I am learning how to use a fax machine. I am learning a gang of shit here. Love, Chico. P.S. I really love this job. Thanks for getting it for me. Well, 6 months later, I was fumbling with my keys at 7:30 in the morning, and I could hear the phone insistent ringing inside, and I catch it in mid-ring, and it's Chico's mother, Rosa, to tell me that the night before, Chico had been standing not far from his front porch talking to some neighbors, and a car slowly comes down the block, and it seems to decrease its speed once it catches sight of Chico standing there. When he catches up with Chico, this car, the windows are rolled down, mad-dogging glances are exchanged, words are volleyed back and forth. And finally, a single bullet flies from the back seat and lodges very high up on Chico's neck, and he's taken to General Hospital. I rush over there. I walk into the unit, and I see Chico all tubed up, nose, mouth, arms. He's naked, but for a diaper. But the most notable thing of all are his eyes. They're held wide open like he had toothpicks holding them there. There's a doctor at the foot of his bed scribbling notes in a clipboard. So I go to him to assess Chico's condition. And the doctor shakes his head and he says, you know, Father, in all my years, I've never seen a paralysis so high. It's so high on the stem of the spine, in fact, we